The officer wasn't asking about alcohol, he wasn't asking about drugs, and he wasn't accusing the driver of causing the crash. At least, not yet. The man standing beside the highway thought the worst part was already over. Airbags had deployed. The front end of his SUV was destroyed. State troopers had taken statements from both drivers. Everybody was shaken up, but alive. Then one of the officers looked at him and said something that completely changed the tone of the scene. "We'll pull the vehicle data." That was the moment the driver realized his own car had been recording him the entire time. His speed, his braking, whether he touched the accelerator, whether he was wearing a seatbelt, exactly how the vehicle moved seconds before impact. And according to investigators later involved in the case, that data told a very different story than the one the driver gave at the scene. Most Americans have absolutely no idea this system even exists. But if your vehicle was made after 2014, there's a very good chance your car already contains something called an event data recorder, an EDR. Most people just call it the black box. And depending on where you live, law enforcement may be able to access parts of that data without a warrant after a crash. Not your phone, not your home security system, your own car, quietly recording you. Before we go any further, hit subscribe right now, because this channel covers the legal and technological changes most Americans don't hear about until it's already affecting them directly. And trust me, what's happening with vehicle data right now is only getting bigger. Now let's talk about what your car may already know about you. Most drivers think modern vehicles are basically just transportation with a few extra computers built in. Navigation, Bluetooth, lane assist, backup cameras. But modern cars have quietly become rolling data systems, and most people never stop to think about what that actually means. Because once computers entered vehicles, data entered vehicles too, a lot of it. And hidden inside many cars is a system specifically designed to capture information immediately before and during a crash event. Speed, brake pressure, throttle position, steering input, seatbelt usage, airbag deployment timing, in some vehicles even more. Not hours of footage like a dash cam, usually just a short snapshot. But here's the part that catches people off guard. Sometimes those few seconds are enough to completely reshape a legal case. And courts across the country are still wrestling with a major constitutional question surrounding all of this. Who actually owns that data? You, the manufacturer, insurance companies, law enforcement? Because once a crash happens, that question suddenly becomes very important, especially when investigators want access to what your car recorded. And this is where things start getting uncomfortable for a lot of drivers. Many people assume police would automatically need a warrant to access information stored inside your vehicle. In some situations, they do. In others, the legal lines become much blurrier. Some states have passed laws requiring consent or warrants before certain vehicle data can be accessed. Others haven't. And in many situations involving serious crashes, injuries, fatalities, or investigations into reckless driving, vehicle data extraction has become increasingly common, quietly common. The average driver still has no idea this technology is sitting inside their own vehicle. That's the scary part. This conversation is happening in courtrooms, legal journals, and police investigations, while millions of Americans are driving around without realizing their car may already be documenting their behavior behind the wheel. And once you understand how modern investigations work, you start realizing why this matters so much. Because crashes are no longer reconstructed using only eyewitnesses. Now investigators compare stories against data. And data doesn't panic. Data doesn't forget. Data doesn't get nervous during questioning. Your car simply records what happened. Or at least, what the system believes happened. That distinction matters. A lot. Because people hear black box and assume the system is perfectly accurate. Not necessarily. Defense attorneys across the country have challenged vehicle data interpretations in multiple cases. Sometimes sensors malfunction. Sometimes data gets misunderstood. Sometimes investigators overstate what the information actually proves. But even when the data is incomplete, it can still heavily influence an investigation the second officers know it exists. And that changes the psychology of traffic investigations entirely. Years ago, after a crash, investigators mainly focused on physical evidence and witness statements. Now, modern vehicles themselves can become witnesses. That changes everything, especially for ordinary drivers who think they're dealing with a routine accident report, until someone mentions downloading vehicle data. And this is where many legal experts say Americans are falling behind technology, because the law is evolving slower than the cars themselves. Courts are still trying to determine exactly where Fourth Amendment protections begin and end when it comes to digital vehicle systems. And if this feels familiar, it should. We've already watched similar battles happen with cell phone tracking, GPS data, location history, and geofence warrants. Technology moves fast, privacy law moves slowly, and in the middle of that gap, ordinary people get caught. Now here's where this gets even more complicated. A lot of drivers assume, if I own the car, I control the data. That sounds logical, but modern vehicles involve manufacturers, software systems, cloud connectivity, dealerships, insurers, and third-party systems all interacting together. Some newer vehicles don't just store crash data locally, they transmit information automatically. Vehicle diagnostics, driving behavior, telematics, location-related systems, emergency response systems, and depending on the manufacturer and services enabled inside the vehicle, the amount of information collected can become surprisingly extensive. This is one reason privacy advocates have started sounding alarms about connected vehicles over the last few years. Because modern cars are no longer just mechanical machines. They're becoming rolling computers connected to massive data ecosystems. And most drivers clicked agree to terms and conditions without ever reading what the vehicle might actually collect. That's not paranoia, that's reality. Now, to be clear, this does not mean police can magically access every detail from every car whenever they want. That's where online conversations often become exaggerated. Different states have different rules. Different circumstances create different legal standards. And courts continue to debate many of these questions actively. But what absolutely is true is that vehicle data has become a major part of modern investigations, especially after crashes, especially when serious injury is involved, especially when officers suspect reckless driving, impairment, excessive speed, or criminal negligence. And once investigators believe relevant evidence exists inside the vehicle itself, the legal fight often shifts very quickly toward access to that data. This is exactly why some defense attorneys now warn clients not to assume the conversation ends after speaking to police at the scene, because increasingly, the vehicle may continue speaking afterward. And honestly, this is where a lot of Americans experience a weird psychological shift once they learn about EDR systems. At first, people think, well, I don't drive recklessly, so who cares? But then the bigger realization hits. It's not just about criminal cases. It's about surveillance creep, about technology quietly expanding faster than public awareness, about normal people slowly becoming accustomed to machines recording more and more aspects of everyday life. Phones, homes, doorbells, highways, and now your own vehicle. That's why legal scholars are paying very close attention to how courts handle these cases moving forward. Because eventually, higher courts, possibly even the Supreme Court, may need to answer larger constitutional questions about vehicle data privacy. Questions like, does accessing EDR data qualify as a search under the Fourth Amendment? Does owning a connected vehicle reduce your expectation of privacy? Can manufacturers voluntarily provide certain information? What happens when cloud-connected vehicle systems become even more advanced? And make no mistake, they are becoming more advanced, rapidly. Modern cars already contain cameras, driver monitoring systems, lane tracking systems, biometric features, internet connectivity, remote diagnostics, automatic emergency communication systems, and AI-assisted driving technology. This isn't science fiction anymore. This is already happening, and the legal system is racing to catch up. Now, there's another reason this topic matters that almost nobody talks about. Behavior changes when people know they're being recorded. That's human nature. But what happens when people don't realize they're being recorded? That's where things become psychologically strange. Because millions of drivers still think of their vehicle as private space, a place where they're alone, a place disconnected from surveillance. But modern technology is slowly erasing that assumption piece by piece. And many people won't fully realize how much has changed until after an accident. When investigators start discussing data extraction, that's the moment the reality suddenly feels real, not theoretical, real. Now, some manufacturers and industry groups argue these systems provide important safety benefits. And to be fair, sometimes they absolutely do. Vehicle data has helped reconstruct crashes, identify dangerous defects, improve safety systems, and clarify disputed accidents. There are situations where this technology genuinely helps people. That's important to acknowledge. This conversation is not simply technology bad. It's more complicated than that. The real issue is transparency. Do drivers actually understand what their vehicles collect? Do they understand who may eventually access that information? Do they understand how evolving privacy law affects them? Most don't. And that lack of awareness is exactly why this issue is becoming such a growing legal flashpoint. Because once people realize their own car may contain evidence about their behavior, they start asking bigger questions about digital privacy altogether. And honestly, that conversation is only beginning. 5 years from now, vehicle data systems will likely be dramatically more advanced than they are today. 10 years from now, modern cars may record exponentially more information than they currently do. Driving patterns, attention monitoring, interior camera activity, biometric responses, AI risk scoring, insurance-linked behavior analysis. Some of that technology is already being tested right now, quietly, which means the legal battles surrounding vehicle privacy are probably going to become one of the biggest constitutional issues of the next decade. Not because people suddenly became criminals, because ordinary life itself is becoming increasingly measurable, trackable, recordable. And history shows something important about technology. Once systems capable of collecting data exist, someone eventually wants access to the data. That pattern repeats over and over. Phones, internet history, location tracking, smart devices, now vehicles. And many Americans are only beginning to realize how connected all of this has become. So what should drivers take away from all this? First, understand that modern vehicles are no longer purely mechanical machines. They are data systems. Second, know that laws surrounding vehicle data vary dramatically depending on state law and the circumstances of an investigation. Third, don't assume privacy law has fully caught up with modern automotive technology, because in many ways, it hasn't. And finally, start paying attention to what your own vehicle may actually be collecting. Because the biggest shift happening right now isn't just technological, it's psychological. Americans are slowly discovering that the machines around them are recording far more than they ever realized. And sometimes, those recordings become evidence. That realization changes how people see modern driving entirely. Not because your car is evil, not because every crash becomes a criminal investigation, but because technology quietly changed the relationship between drivers, privacy, and law enforcement long before most people noticed it happening. And now the legal system is trying to figure out where the boundaries actually are. The question is whether those boundaries will arrive before the technology expands even further. Because if there's one thing modern history keeps proving, it's that convenience arrives first. Privacy questions come later.